Hey everyone, we're gonna get started in 30 seconds or so. So buckle up, about to get
Yeah,
excited.
so happy, so happy to see everybody here.
All right, all right. Hello everyone. We're gonna get started and people will get welcomed into this space as we have our introduction. Welcome to Medicine Making Mutual Aid. So grateful you chose to spend time with us today. I'm excited to talk about building revolutionary futures and also honoring our revolutionary past. And also really excited to talk about the ways that medicine making and mutual aid intersect and just take a deep dive in how to show up for our communities in effective ways with plant medicine and beyond. So thanks for being here. We'd love to get to know you. So if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, you can share your name, your pronouns, the land you're zooming in from, anything else you might want to share. And also just a couple housekeeping things. Feel free to utilize the chat to share resources or ask questions or connect with each other. There's also going to be a Q&A at the end of the program. We can answer all the juicy or, or not juicy, just chill questions. Um, and also closed captioning is available if you click more captions and show captions, I'm pretty sure. And also everybody who is a staff or facilitator has a plus by their name. So if you have any questions, feel free to DM us. Um, and yeah, that's kind of the housekeeping stuff. And without further ado, I feel like we're going to get into it. We're going to go over our agenda and then we're going to dive in. So, Hillary, do you mind going to our next slide? Okay, so today this is just a little rundown of the things we're going to go through. We're going to have kind of a little introduction to why we opted to share about plant medicine and why it feels important now. We're going to have some time to talk about mutual aid, which I'm really excited for. We're going to go deeper into some plant medicine and recipes, and then go into safety, distribution, and sustainable sourcing. And then we're going to have a chance to talk to each other and maybe make a little herbal action step that we can take from this programming. Yeah, and then we'll wrap it up with some resources, ways to stay connected, and then we'll close the space. Um, so yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. And I'll pass it over to Io to bring our ancestors into the space.
Good. Can we move to the next slide? All right, y'all. As Jazz has shared, we're so happy that we're all here together. We're here showing up for ourselves, for our communities, and also showing up for our ancestors who went before us to make sure that we are able to be here and who can really inspire us and inform a lot of the ways that we are able to practice as herbalists, as healers, as community members. And so when we were thinking about this time together and who we wanted to call into the space, obviously, in addition to our own sacred ancestors, each of us bringing who comes with us, we wanted to highlight some real special folks and groups of folks who you're seeing here on the slide right now. One of them being the Granny Midwives. So the Granny Midwives, not so much an organization or an association, but kind of the collective of the Black women and femmes, non-binary folks, starting in enslavement, who inherited values, practices, roles, community trust, and respected elder status, coming out of African healing systems and traditions. So oftentimes in literature, we'll see them called grannies or granny midwives, but these are folks who not only delivered babies in the midwife sense, but also were in service to community on so many different dynamic levels. So they're serving as physicians and healers, as root women and conjurers, as spiritual ritualists, as herbalists, as confidants, so holding many, many roles. We want to lift and uplift George Washington Carver, a favorite of so many of us. There's so much we could say, but for the purposes of what we're talking about today, I'm thinking about two things. One is his dedication to really knowing and respecting the land on a deep relational mystical basis. So that right there was so much of the source of his ability to do science and the way he did science. The other thing I think about was the way that he allowed the community, the wider community, and folks that he was serving in Alabama, throughout the South, throughout this land, um, in being educated and understanding more about what it is they're doing, and in understanding and holding information and education as being something that is for the people, and making sure to disseminate information in a way that serves the most people in the simplest and more understandable, understandable kind of ways. We honor Harriet Tubman, who was disabled, who was Black, who navigated the forest, both as someone who was able to secure her own and others' freedom, but also a Civil War spy, a nurse. So someone who knew the land, the plants, who knew about treating fellow journeyers, who knew about how to support the wounded and the dying with plant medicine. One thing we know about Mother Harriet is that the liberation of the collective was the value that shaped all of her work, including her work as a healer. So we're lifting her up. And then Dr. Mutulu Shakur. So he died just a few years ago, but Dr. Shakur is a former Black Panther, prominent member of the Republic of New Africa. He's often spoken about in terms of being a political prisoner, but one thing that a lot of people don't always emphasize was that he was an acupuncturist. He, along with members of the Young Lords, of other Black Panthers and other revolutionaries, established the People's Drug Program at the Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx in 1970. And so when we think about today, the idea of community acupuncture, we can really look at the Lincoln Detox Center, which was a project of the people for the people, as a space that was not only for healing, not only for clinical work, but that offered political education, that offered community services. And so this is really predecessor of a lot of the mutual aid work that we see today. And last but absolutely not least, we raise Emma Dupree, a granny midwife and herbalist who served the communities of Falkland and Fountain in Pitt County, North Carolina, who was an herbal prodigy from the time that she was really young, which shows us that we don't have to be grown folks to begin getting our hands in the work. Herbal practices for everyone. So we often will, I think about her a lot as being like the godmother of like modern Black herbalism today, partly because of the impact that her life and legacy has had in the last 20 years because of the documentation that we have access to. So if you've never seen Little Medicine Thing, it's a student-produced documentary about her life. From her, in her own words, I implore you to find Little Medicine Thing and learn more about Emma Dupree in her own words. So we're lifting up all of these ancestors and all of our collective ancestors today. Can we go to the next slide?
Oh, thank you, Ayo. So we thought we'd take some time to introduce ourselves, just so you know who you're talking to. And my name is Jazz. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an Afro-Caribbean, I'm non-binary, I'm an herbalist and a farmer, and have been for the past 11 years. I founded a mutual aid apothecary in 2020, called Heart Space Healing, and also am an educator to youth and adults alike for farming, uh, garden and farm education, and I'm also one of the program managers at Soulfire Farm. Um, and my herbal approach, just because I also am an herbalist, I'm definitely deeply informed by my African and Caribbean ancestors. I love thinking about nutrition and food as medicine. Deeply informed also by the practice of Ayurveda and mutual aid. And I just love sustainable foraging, definitely mushrooms, as you can see in that top picture. That's one of my main jams. And yeah, I'm currently doing my training as a clinical herbalist and just love learning about herbs and am inspired and moved by all that plants have to teach us all the time. So I'll pass it back to you, Io, to introduce yourself.
I just love that. I was over here trying to find, like, here we go, this reaction, because you're such a star. I'm honored to be in this space with you.
Thanks.
Hey, y'all, I'm Io Ngozi. I use the pronouns she and her. Um, I have been an herbalist, kind of a community herbalist. I was trained as a clinician, but really pretty quickly turned to doing work in community. So I've been doing this work for the last 14-ish years. I'm a grower, I'm an herbalist. I created Brickyard Gardens, which is a nonprofit org here in Savannah, Georgia. I'm a Muskogee and Wale and Yamasee land, where I live and work. And the purpose of Brickyard is really to support community through education, through providing medicine through providing seeds to culturally important and specific food crops and medicines, and make sure the folks have access. So that is the work that I do. I parent. I serve my Orisha. I am here fortunate to be very close to the land that my ancestral roots on my mother's side are from. So my mama Gullah Geechee from Wamala Island and Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. My father's family was sharecroppers in Virginia. And so I really bring both of those kind of sides of my lineages together in the work as well. I love my bees. I just started tending to a hive, and they're like the lights of my day every day. In terms of how I think about this medicine, I really have a deep commitment to making herbal medicine and knowledge and understanding and skill sets around herbs available to anybody who wants access. This is something that we've all come into this world inheriting. Like, we're all, each one of us, descended from someone or someones who had very deep plant knowledge. And there's a part of me that always thinks that that's why we end up in these spaces. Someone in the back in the day is whispering in our ears, like, hey, come back to the medicine, or stay in the medicine. So that is something I think about a lot. I mentioned I was trained as a clinician. And so there is a part of me that is just going to like do the Western science nerd out. And we'll get into an herbal constituent here and there. But I also am always holding that traditional knowledge, understanding traditional technologies and systems are what I really kind of privilege and what I go to first. And I go there and then see what does the science, what does this Western science have to say about what our folks already know and have practiced. So yeah, that's what I got. I'm so happy to be here. So happy to share space with you, Jazz, and get into this conversation about mutual aid.
Thanks, Io. Also, star. Thank you so much. So you may be wondering, like, why plant medicine? Why now? Like, why plant medicine and mutual aid? And so we wanted to kind of build a foundation of like kind of what we're seeing plant medicine as is this catalyst for liberation and healing. And so I want to be clear and say plant medicine is actually always, not just now, but we find that, of course, right now it's especially as important. I don't have to tell you that we're in the midst of like very intense global violence, spiritual, mental, and ecological attack, and it's changing us on a cellular level, literally. And I just went through a training through the Healing Clinic Collective, and Carla M. Perez talked about and used the term crisis of disconnection. And I think that term really beautifully encapsulates the current conditions of being really disconnected from, each other and our lands and our lifeways. Um, and naming that, health has been largely commodified and it's like more rooted in capitalism and honestly ableism and is very individualistic. Um, and sometimes it can be a challenge to differentiate what is here to heal us and what is more exploitative. And I think that herbal medicine is a very accessible and grounding way to engage in both preventative care and active healing. And it's just nourishing and supportive. And also, herbal medicine is just a beautiful and potent reminder that the colonizer didn't win. We have our medicines, we have our ways of healing. We're still utilizing magnolia, which is on the slide, which was alive with the dinosaurs. And it was pollinized. It was pollinated by beetles before bees even existed, So, um, and herbal medicine has been this way of connecting to each other and our bodies, our ceremony, our culture since time immemorial and will always be. And it reaffirms that we belong to this larger ecosystem alongside the trees and the animals and the bees and the soils and the waters. And it's just a reminder of our interconnectedness. Um, and I would say that the centering of this interconnectedness, I think, reminds us or can remind us of our own resilience over time. And it centers less of the individual experience and grounds us in collectivism or mutualism, which is the basis of mutual aid. And we think about collectivism when we think about, the collective systems in our bodies working together to heal to heal the ecosystem. We think about the ecosystem that the plants belong to, relating to those systems in our body, and also the relationships between us who are healing each other through the use of plant medicine. So I think it's just like a big um, a big representation of collective healing, mutualism, symbiosis, etc. And just like on a practical note, like I mentioned, the accessibility of plant medicine can really support us in centralizing care within our immediate communities, and is important to building and reclaiming these skills to heal ourselves and each other. And I definitely want to say we're not saying abandon your doctor. We're not saying never seek medical attention. That's never something that we're gonna we're gonna say to do. Just acknowledging that the medical industrial complex has its challenges, and there are multiple ways of healing that work in tandem to provide a more holistic lifestyle. So that's kind of why plant medicine and why now more of like the heady, expansive version, but also like more of the practical. Um, and yeah, if anybody wants to share of other reasons why they might uh, use plant medicine, feel free to add in the chat. Um, and we're going to talk more about plant medicine in the training, but we're going to dive first into mutual aid. So you can go to the next slide. And I'd love to hear from folks um, of what does mutual aid mean to you? And you can put it in the chat um, if you'd like. You're also welcome to come off mute. We have probably time for like one or two folks to share. Local plants that grow to help for healing, pulling and sharing of resources, financial skills or inflammation. Yeah, definitely beautiful. Sharing resources, community care, definitely a lot of resource sharing, monetary and not. Yeah, beautiful examples. Thank you so much. Um, so I want to say that part of the reason of focusing on mutual aid is, we're kind of in a time where buzzwords can dominate. And I think it's, and I think mutual aid is one of those words and terms that is thrown around often without seeking like greater clarification, historical context, or creating a deeper analysis about, how these systems and structures have served us over time. Like, what have they brought to fruition? Um, and I think that mutual aid was swirling. It was really reinvigorated by our collective interactions with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I feel like that's kind of where the buzzword kind of began, at least in my understanding and sphere. But um, just want to reiterate that these values have been so present since forever, since we've existed, especially in our own Indigenous communities. And so we wanted to talk about mutual aid, what it means, how it's been over time. And I'm going to go into what mutual aid means to me in my understanding um, and IO in a sec, but I wanted to give an example because I just read Dean Spade's book, Mutual Aid Building Solidarity in This Crisis and the Next. And it really talked about kind of straying away from the hero narrative and talking about how these huge movements that we may associate with in like our history and liberation, it's really centered upon one being, and it's not necessarily taking into account just like the thousands of people and the networks of mutual aid that were really present during that time. And he uses this example of the Montgomery bus boycott, um, you know, who is, it's largely associated with Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. But oftentimes it isn't centered that, they helped coordinate rides and were boycotting for over 18 months. And they were coordinating rides for over 30,000 working class Black people. And there was like extensive organizing around ride sharing and carpooling, and there was, um, you know, food selling to buy cars to be able to transport people to and from work. There were dispatch stations and a lot of shared emotional, financial, and physical support. But it's just an example of sometimes how a little bit of erasure can kind of cover up how we show up for our collective wellness and being, and how mutual aid has like really been a foundation of a lot of these movements and is really powerful. Um, so I wanted to give that example before we dive in to the next slide about mutual aid. So mutual aid, um, believe it or not, mutual aid is not just necessarily, it can encompass, but isn't just necessarily like helping people out. It isn't necessarily charity, and it's definitely not nonprofits. Um, this professor, Sean Parson, talks about how like the nonprofit system encourages social movements to follow capitalist models. And it's just like very much not rooted in what mutual aid is all about. So I wanted to make that distinction, and want to also emphasize what we talked about earlier and emphasize mutual, how it's emphasis on mutualism, which means giving and receiving, is very community rooted. So mutual aid is at its core non-hierarchical. It's a mechanism for community resilience. It's anti-capitalist, abolition-based. There's a circulation of resources, and we're straying away from a sense of domination. Um, it's a voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources and services for mutual benefit. Um, it's a way of establishing care models um, that can be replicated in other communities, supports community power and autonomy, and power is shared and created and uplifted. It can be malleable and fluid, so it can address urgent needs, but also can provide a consistent flow of resources. And also is multi-issue and embraces intersectionality. And it embraces intersectionality by recognizing that people that are living under oppressive conditions oftentimes are crossing these multiple issues, right? So, individuals might need support with food and housing and childcare. And oftentimes, of course, that's by design. So, taking into account intersectionality and where we're meeting. Um, and that focus on alternative systems of care that are operating outside of the dominant care models that oftentimes aren't very caring. um, can look like a lot of things. They can look like supporting with economic development, decentralizing healthcare, resource sharing, which a lot of you mentioned, and distribution, meeting immediate needs, education, solidarity and movement spaces, and community and political organizing. Um, and just re-emphasizing that these values have been practiced as long as our existence has been. So we can move forward. Um, we're gonna do just an example of some um, some mutual aid throughout time. So, like I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw this real resurgence and revigoration because we were, you know, dealing with this crisis on such a large and collective scale that we saw like people really jump into leadership with trying to get people's basic needs met because the gaps were like so clear in our communities. And so there was this urgency surrounding like really caring for each other. And we saw that in so many ways. Definitely like where I was in Portland, Oregon at the time. There was definitely an emphasis on like the block model, which is folks specializing in, one or two specific resources and giving it for free or low cost, like inhalers and masks and tests, etc. And then there was just and is a huge emphasis on meeting folks' basic needs. So you see food pantries and mass and testing support, helping elders and immunocompromised folks access whatever they needed at the time. Um, and also concurrently, because there was increased visibility surrounding police brutality against Black bodies, there was a super large protest presence and solidarity all over the country and beyond. And with that came the need for protest response. So it was like showing up for folks with first aid or legal support or organizing these large solidarity movements. So that was definitely like a huge resurgence and definitely one of the more recent examples of like mutual aid really, really exploding and gaining lots of visibility. Um, and I would say that also moving on to our next example is like one of the most popular and admired examples of mutual aid are the Black Panthers survival programs. Those programs are said to address survival pending revolution. And they were born out of the need for community resilience initiatives due to white supremacy and racialized poverty. And one of the like shining examples is the free breakfast program. Um, you know, there was a quote, I forgot who said it, but it was many people organize around food because food is essential for survival and well-being. And I think that that informs, a lot of the work I do. And the free breakfast program, it started in a church and it ended up feeding 20,000 kids per day and was ended up being in 36 cities. And there were over like 60 other survival programs that address things like free food and clothes and legal defense and transportation and political education and health. Um, and I think another example is the People's Free Medical Research Health Clinic, which help provide like preventative care and health screenings and highlighted just racial disparities in health access. And there are two more examples I'll mention. And really, we're seeing these like really in like crisis states, right? So the HIV and AIDS crisis in the 1980s, there were health clinics, there were food pantries, there were therapy groups, and community support programs, and definitely like nonviolent civil disobedience. So this photo shows ACT UP, which was a grassroots queer-led protest movement, and this is like a demonstration of theirs. Um, and I just wanted to kind of uplift that, there's a lot of discourse around this, but since the inception of like colonial oppression, African, indigenous lineages, we've relied on each other to meet our survival needs. So, these values of mutual aid, some people say like mutual aid is kind of forever and has always been there. Before mutual aid had a name, we did rely on each other in totality. Um, but also in the sense like we didn't necessarily like need mutual aid because we were self-governed and like more reliant on each other for survival. And then some people say that mutual aid like is a direct result of colonialism and these systems like not doing what they're supposed to do. And so we're relying on each other to meet um, our basic needs. So it's really, you can fall wherever you want on that. But what I'll say is like our cultures are rooted in mutuality and care. And so the values, regardless of the name, is like always there. Um, and what I'll end with, thank you for letting me nerd out. I've been enjoying this. But what I'll end with is we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to end with a little quote from Marvin Wall Kimner. And it says, what happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together, feast together. All flourishing is mutual. In our oldest stories, we're reminded that when we rely deeply on other lives, there is an urgency to protect them. So, thank you for listening about the mutual aid. I think I was going to give an example of some mutual aid in action.
I am. Thank you so much for that, Jazz. I feel like you like set the table so beautifully. As you were speaking, I was, knowing that I was going to come in with this example, which is one of just so many. There's a lot that you touched on just now that had me like ping, ping, ping. Like the first thing was the colonizer didn't win. That I was really thinking about. So what we're seeing here on the screen is a few of many photos that are in my phone right now that remind me that the colonizer didn't win, that remind me that mutual aid is not even necessarily, mutual aid is not charity. Mutual aid is a give and a take. So the Ile or the spiritual communities that I'm connected to here in the States work really closely with a much older Cuban cabildo that's in the same spiritual lineage in Matanzas, Cuba. And when we talk about cabildos, that's another thing you were just talking about, like how mutual aid, in a lot of ways, we can think about it as something that came out of colonization in terms of having a name, and having this very specific, almost compartmentalized kind of function. And I feel like cabildos are one of those examples. Like if we think about cabildos in the Spanish speaking part of the Caribbean, if we think about palenques in Brazil or quilombos in Brazil, there are these spaces, or even, mutual aid and like social and pleasure clubs coming out of New Orleans, right? We're thinking about these spaces where folks have come together um, to support one another with all kinds of life needs. In this context, it's coming out of spiritual community, it's coming out of religion. But one thing that's really important when we think about things like colonization not winning is that religion or spirituality can be, particularly religion, can be a tool, right? It can be a vehicle to a larger thing. And I feel like looking at Cabildo Omiloki, which is this group of folks that I love so dearly in Cuba, we see this in action. We can really see the historical basis for them having formed cabildos, a couple hundred years ago, and how these spaces still exist. still continue and still flourish, even in in the face of state violence. And when I talk about state violence, I'm not only talking about the US and the sanctions that have been imposed on the people of Cuba for so long. I'm also talking about the internal government structures and internal functions and things that have made it hard for folks to flourish. So for the last couple of years, we've been engaged in mutual aid with the folks there at this cabildo. This is something where we raise money. It helps pay for people's initiations. It literally helps pay for ceremony, which is not just about like, I'm doing ceremony, I'm getting some beads or I'm getting this title, but it's like, what does that actually mean for the larger community that folks are in service to? So when supporting one person, you're supporting an entire community of people, both religious and non-religious. So what we've been doing is raising funds to help pay for initiations, but also to provide solar power. Because what good is having ceremony if you can't see one another because it's dark, and you can't do ceremony or you can't feed people, or don't have access to medicine or clothing or the things that are needed just for daily living. And so that's something we've been doing. And on this end, it means raising money. That's just something that on this side of the water, which is like that big, the space of water in between is like ridiculously small. But being here in the States, we have access to material resources. We have access to a lot of us US passports, if we had that privilege. So we have that, but it doesn't make this dynamic one of charity. Yes, we can send money, but we're sharing space as siblings. So our community in Cuba has greater access to a lot of things that we here don't have access to. So herbal knowledge, protocol, and the herbal knowledge is super important because this is central to these practices. Without medicine, there is no OSHA, so we're talking about protocols, we're talking about language, we're talking about historical memory that's really, really important in oral-based traditions to perpetuate the culture and to support folks. So all of it is priceless. And so I really think there are a lot of other, mutual aid things I've been involved with, especially since 2020, right? But this is something that's front of mind. It's something I'm really actively involved in right now. And it's something that reminds me of the balance that comes through mutual aid, because I know that I receive more than what it is that I give. And I think that if you were to ask some of my folks there, they might say the same thing. So it's really the idea of this all flourishing being mutual in action. And so thank you for inviting me, Jazz, to use that, to name that as an example in this space. And we can move forward and get a little bit more into herbal medicine, plant medicine, and what this means. Oh, no, we don't, because we have more to say. You have more to say, my bad.
Oh yeah, we just have one little slide just about examples of herbal mutual aid because we're kind of combining the two as herbalists and people who have been, you know, associated with mutual aid in various ways. And so these are kind of ideas that we can meld these two together, including like free herbal clinics, donation drives, and food pantries because food is medicine, and also utilizes herbs and spices, which are healing. Elder, child support, care rotations, trans and queer support groups and herbal studies, medicine making circles, community herb pantries, and natural disaster herbal support, free or low cost body work or healing days, and what we're doing now, like free or low cost herbal education. So these are just some examples of ways I've seen herbal mutual aid expressed, but also feel free to share more in the chat if you have more, and we can keep on moving.
Sorry, we're going to talk a bit about plant medicine and mutual aid. And so I'm going to preface this by saying we have put together a resource, super excited about it. Everyone will have access to it after this call. But in the context of mutual aid, plant medicine, we're thinking of community care here. And community care can look like so many things. We can address the physical We can address the spiritual, the emotional, the mental bodies. We can work with plant medicine to support community beyond just the individual, and folks who have shared experience either in their with imbalances in their bodies or the activities that they're involved with or have in common. So for the purposes of the conversation today, we're really kind of focusing in and honing in on herbal medicine, plant medicine as remedies, in that kind of a form. But I'm also thinking a lot about other ways that plant medicine shows up that is not necessarily as a tea, or a tincture. There's some amazing work that folks are doing with mutual aid nurseries, with food forests in different communities, with guerrilla gardening, with community-based agroforestry. That's just really interesting and really important. So I wanted to just name that, although that's not really what we're focusing on today. But because you're going into breakout groups later on, and we'll be thinking about, and dreaming into what might be a space to enter into mutual aid, I also wanted to really make sure to name those because there's so many ways that we can engage. One thing I love about herbalism, herbal practices, and the reason I decided to kind of make this the life that I'm living is because there's no bottom to it. Like I was thinking about it and going, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life that I could do forever? And I feel like this is one of those things. There's so many things that are like that. But this kind of practice with plant medicine is the kind of thing that you never get to the bottom of. No matter how much you know, no matter how much you've learned, no matter how many times you sat with a particular plant, someone else is going to come in and be like, did you know this about the plant? Or the plant might tell you something about itself that you've never learned otherwise, right? So there's no bottom to the work. And I want us to be thinking about that. So what we're putting forward here are some examples, are some ideas, or some kind of like arenas and spaces of healing. But I also want us to not just be limited to this as we think about and dream into what we can do and ways that we can affect change and support our communities and be supported by our folks as well. So when we were designing this session, Jazz and I went back and forth, kind of taking into account the kind of spaces where we've seen mutual aid practices and projects be really effective, where we've seen more care, more projects needed, ways that, and also talked a lot about the logistics of this stuff, like how do we create projects where medicine can be distributed easily, efficiently, in ways that make sense? How do we do projects where we don't need to be clinicians or have super specialized, skills or training, because this is the people's medicine? And so in having those conversations, we came up with the categories that you see on the screen. So we're talking about post-protest care or post-gathering care, caring for children, caring for our elders, addressing common immune challenges that can come up, like our coughs, colds, flus, COVID-19 variants and such, dealing with emotional burnout. And if there are any other areas, that you can think of that can be addressed, really well addressed with mutual aid, herbal care, drop them in the chat. Inspire your girl, inspire your people. Because there's no bottom to it. But I think it really is important to think when we're thinking about mutual aid, what I have found, and I don't know if you've shared this experience, Jazz, is that it can be helpful not to get too specific, right? Because part of the idea of this is how can we be of greatest service and of in good relationship and kind of developing and deepening relationship with folks. So it's not just a matter of, here, let me give you some herbs, which it can be, but it's also, let me sit with you, let me understand what's going on, let me be of service to you. And what I have found in my practice is when I'm able to know a lot about fewer things, like Adrienne Maree Brown talks about going mile wide and inch deep versus inch wide and mile deep. What I found is it's more helpful for me to go inch wide and mile deep in mutual aid practices, so that I'm not trying to be everything to all of the people, but that I have like a few things that I can do really, really well and really solidly, and bring this medicine that I know that I have a handle on to the community, which is going to be really different than the things that Jazz has to offer, than the things that Hillary has to offer, than the things that you all have to offer. So in putting together this list, we were trying to think about what can be of solid care, the greatest good to the most people that we are in relationship with. And so we're thinking about things like what is accessible, what is affordable, for folks to access or free to access, what can be made and prepared in large quantities so they can be distributed to the most folks in community, within organizations, within movement spaces, within neighborhoods, hand to hand at the daycare drop off, or to the senior center, or to the community fridge, if we have that where we live. And again, there's a resource document at the end, so you'll really be able to get more into the nitty gritty of the recipes. But one thing I was thinking about earlier, and this is kind of relates to the accessibility piece, is that one thing you're likely to see, and I don't know how many herbalists we have in this space, but like, just put it out there. Jazz, you can answer if you want to. If you were to think about what herbs, or what is an herb that if I wanted to offer that to the most people to get the most bang for the least amount of money expended, what kind of herbs will we be thinking about? Like specific plants might you think about, or groups of plants? Yeah, mushrooms. Come on, mushrooms. Yes, nettles. I love that. I think we have nettles, and we have mushrooms and nettles in some of these recipes for sure. One thing that comes to me, ginger, yes. Go to the grocery store, get the little body of spice pack. Yarrow mints. I was absolutely thinking about mints for sure. These are things that are so abundant. Y'all went in. Okay, so basically the class is done. We can all go. But no, exactly. So we together we know a lot, y'all. So what I'm seeing when I look at this list here are things that are widely available, easy to get for the most part, things that are just like weeds and wild and flourish on their own without needing a whole lot of human tending. Things that you can find at the grocery store or even at the dollar store, depending on your dollar store, right? So I'm seeing this here, and we're already on the same page. One thing I think about too, this is like I'm going way off notes, but that's okay. I'll come back. When I think about the accessibility piece, I'm also thinking about things like what we want to do is be able to bring the best to our communities, the best to our people that we can. If that means that we can do the, expeller pressed virgin coconut oil in the salve, get it. That's fantastic. Love that for you. But also, there is something to be said for like the Crisco oil based cayenne salve as a topical. Not that Crisco is the number one fabulous thing that we want to ingest all the time, but my point is we do the best we can with what we got and what we have access to. And so we want to offer our communities the best, but keep in mind as well that as we're making medicine, we are also part of the medicine that we offer, right? Like literally each person has the medicine that they come into this plane and into this spirit with, and that always gets folded in and mixed in and blended into any of the offerings that we have for our folks. So don't discount the magic and the medicine that you are yourself and that you bring to this. All right. Thank you for that, allowing me that detour. So in creating mutual aid projects where you might be supporting specific communities or specific movement spaces, it can be helpful to keep these broad categories that we see here on the screen in mind. Not only for your own medicine making, but also if you're planning to like request donations from other herbalists or from farmers or growers or from your local food co-op. Um, these are the kinds of things that you want to keep in mind, these kinds of categories, or what you dropped in the chat. Like, what are the things that are going to allow you to bring the most to other people? It's not always having to be on you. Someone can offer you mutual aid in your effort to provide mutual aid, right? That's part of what makes it mutual. Um, One thing, too, that I'm thinking about is the importance of language when we're doing mutual aid work. So this means if you know that you're providing medicines, you're providing remedies to a community in which a large number of the folks are speaking Spanish, think about that when you're doing labeling. Find out the names of the herbs. Get yourself a comrade, a friend, a Google Translate, which is not optimal, but find a mechanism, find some way that the medicine that you're preparing makes the most sense for the folks who are receiving it. That also means when we think about language, using simple language, like we don't have to go super deep and jargony and constituents and berberine, blah, 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 right? Like you can if folks want to nerd out in that kind of way. But thinking about language, both in terms of the herbalism itself, but also thinking about language in terms of kind of just the terms that we use, the jargon that we use. There are a lot of spaces where, like, I say mutual aid when I talk about our projects in Cuba. The folks in Cuba are not saying mutual aid, right? So thinking about the language that we choose and how are we communicating our intent and the work that we're doing and the relationships that we're working on building in the way that makes the most sense to the folks that we're in service to. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we want to be really mindful when we're providing medicines to other folks around things like individual needs. Do people have allergies? Do people not take alcohol, right? So tinctures might not be the best choice for every person for whatever reason. But what we did try to do in this resource that we're going to share with you is include preparations that can be really flexible. So used in different situations, in ways that make them the most helpful to the most people. We have offered tinctures as remedies, but these could also be prepared as glycerates, right? You might notice when you look at this resource that there are some things that we did not include, right? So when we say cold and flu, children's care, elder care, burnout, post-protest work, we're not talking about things like medicine for chronic illnesses, serious illness. We're not talking about remedies to support, moderate to really severe depression or anxiety, or herbs that significantly modify hormone levels or hormonal flow, not because those kinds of preparations are important, but for safety reasons. It's kind of like knowing what your skill level is, knowing how you can support folks, and really wanting to be able to offer as much care as possible. I thought I do have a little list. I'm not gonna, you can definitely go to the resource, but in terms of post-protest care, we're talking about foot soaks, we're talking about eye washes if you're in the unfortunate situation of dealing with tear gas or other chemical warfare. And a lot of these things can be, moved around, like a joint rub that we have in the section for elder care can be supportive for folks who are not elders, right? Like that can be supportive to whoever has sore joints, aching knees, whatever the situation may be. A sleeping tea intended for children in this resource is something that can also be taken by someone of any age, right? Elder Care also has a recipe for kind of nut butter balls, which don't have to go in nut butter. They could go in coconut. They could also be used as a powder and go into smoothies. But the basis there is really talking about nutrition, right? So yes, we're including it here because elders often don't have the same kind of density in their nutrition as they get older, and access can sometimes be an issue. But that kind of thing can apply and work for everyone. So I wanted to go next to talk about some of the safety considerations a little bit more deeply as we think about how we're making medicine and how we're distributing and how we're sourcing the plants that we bring in. So when we think about safety, number one, be sure of what you're harvesting if you're foraging. Everyone doesn't have to forage, and there's a lot of ethics and considerations to keep in mind. But if you do, you want to be sure that you know exactly what it is that you're harvesting and making medicine of. We want to be safe when we're harvesting. So avoiding industrial areas that are dump sites. So when I was in herb school back in the days, they would be like, don't harvest herbs for medicine making in urban areas. Um, I will say today that, like, I can't speak for Jazz, but speaking for myself, I do not say or teach or necessarily like hold as a hard and fast rule that you cannot harvest medicine in the cities. And what we've actually found more recently is quite often some of those plant constituents are even more effective. Those plants can sometimes be more nutrient dense because of the struggle the plant had to go through to be here. However, if we know that a site has been dumped on, if we know that there's chemicals, there's asbestos in the soil, things like that, we want to use our common sense. It might be best to harvest away from busy roadways where there's kind of more chemical deposits directly to the plants, the leaves, the flowers themselves. If you're not familiar, this is about safety, not for the land or for medicine making per se, but safety for yourself. If you're not familiar with an area and you want to go and harvest, don't do it by yourself. Use a buddy system, go with a crew. A lot of this plant medicine, I feel like now when we think about herbalism, I'll say like herbalism TM. Um, there's this idea that like there's this lone heroic herbalist who's making the medicine and harvesting the medicine and doing all this on their own. This kind of thing is not something that traditionally or historically is meant to be done by one person by themselves all the time, right? So go harvesting with your folks, make it a party, keep each other accountable so that we're not over harvesting, we're not taking more than we ought to, more than we have a right to. And avoid trespassing on private property. Now, that's a whole sermon about private property and land that I'm not going to go into, but the fact is the signs are up and we want to be safe. So I'll leave that at that. So when it comes to actually making medicine, we want to make sure that we're being clean. Our hands are clean. The bowls and strainers and funnels are clean, that if we're reusing bottles, reusing jars, which is fantastic, that we boil them, or sterilize them, making sure we're using clean containers. Wearing masks when we're making medicine, wearing gloves, and especially when we're distributing to other folks, right? Because we don't know what kind of health concerns, issues other folks might have. And it's just a matter of community care and respect and love for one another that we mask up. So that's really important. Collective care is important for everybody. We want to stay in our lane, know our limitations. As much as we might want to be helpful, we can be limited by knowledge and experience in different situations, right? So like I've been doing this practice for close to 15 years, kind of officially on paper. I have a whole ass master's degree in clinical herbal medicine. However, I still don't feel equipped to work with cancer patients. I don't. I'm out of my lane. I'm out of my league, and I know that, and I respect that, and I'm respecting and loving the folks who come to me enough to not start throwing mushrooms at them because I read a study, right? So just staying in our lane and knowing what we can do and knowing what we can't do, and knowing how to refer within community or outside of community, if necessary, to make sure that everyone gets the care that they need and deserve. If you can be aware of people's allergies. If contraindications can be a factor, we want to, that's one reason why we want labeling to be really clear, right? So, for example, some people might be allergic to plants in the aster family, right? So there's a lot of plants in this family. So like chamomile or echinacea or yarrow or feverfew or arnica, or there are like so many of them, right? And someone might know that they're allergic to daisies. And so, okay, well, if you're thinking about medicines, you might want to keep that in mind that just ask, how do you react to chamomile? So if this is something that you have knowledge of, it can be good to just keep that in mind. The other thing I mentioned is contraindications. So someone might have a health diagnosis, or they might be taking pharmaceutical medications, or be taking in some other herbal regimen, right, that might not work well and sync up well with the remedies that you're providing. So if you're just starting off with making herbal medicine, it's helpful to ask about allergies. But the other thing can be really helpful is to stick more to the food-like things than the drug-like things, in terms of herbs. So like folks had mentioned turmeric, folks had mentioned ginger, mushrooms, right? Things that, yes, are herbal medicines, but are also very much food things, right? Because quite often you'll find that they can be safe for more people, not always, but often. And the other thing is people will often know what their food allergies are, even if they don't know what herbal allergies could be an issue for them. So wanted to mention that. Another thing is plants have energetics and their own ways of beings, their own characters, their own constitutions, doshas, the same way that human people do. So the same way that we as humans have our own individual biochemistry, our own personalities, our other, ways of being that make us us, plants also have that. Plants have their own energetic qualities that interact with our bodies. Humans and plants and fungi have been co-evolving since humans got here, right? We got here last, pretty much. So when folks talk about these as being our kin, as these being our relatives, our ancestors, that's like for real, for real. Like we share, I feel like it's like 99%. It's some ridiculously high percentage of DNA with plants. So we're largely made of the same stuff, which beautifully means that we can interact and flow and kind of work co-creatively with plants in making shifts to our health and our vitality and how we're feeling and our symptoms. And sometimes these intersections can be a little bit less optimal. For example, giving a remedy that has a whole lot of heat, a whole lot of energetic heat, let's say like a cayenne tincture to someone like myself who's already really constitutionally hot. Another person might tolerate that really well, but I know that I do not. It's just tips me all the way into fireland, not good for me, right? So when that happens, it's generally not the end of the world, but it does help as you explore medicine making, if you're just coming to it, to know and learn what you can about energetics, just kind of basic energetic principles. Um, and knowing more about looking up, just the energetics of the plants that you're working with. So you don't have to know everything about everything. But if you're like, oh, let me make some chamomile and lemon balm tea, just go check it out. What kind of energetics do these plants have? And that'll give you a sense of how they're going to support what kinds of people. What else? Be sure of what we're offering others. I've mentioned that already. Just like know what you're IDing when you find it. And also, if you're sourcing herbs for medicine making from other people or other places, try to know what that is, right? So it doesn't happen often, but sometimes it can happen that things are adulterated. They've just been, oops, this got mixed with that, so you kind of want to know if you're getting medicine from another person, find out, hey, where did you harvest this? If you're sourcing something online or from a store or something like that, that's been kind of gone through an industrial process of, drying and packaging and that kind of thing. Just, find yourself a reputable supplier, ask around, talk to your herbalist friends, and go with the best options to be as safe as possible with other folks. And then again, label everything clearly, durably, waterproof labels, little Sharpies, things that aren't going to get smudged. If you drip some of that tincture or spill some of that tea, that can be really important as well. And then finally, I would say to know our bodies, do our own research, know what we need to know when we go into taking in medicines and advising, or not advising, but encouraging the people that we're in community with, just in general, outside of this herbal medicine thing, to really have a sense of themselves. We're always the best authority and we have the best knowing of our own selves and our bodies beyond what any herbalist or doctor or anyone else could have. And so it's always good to be encouraging that. All right, I think I finished this slide. We made it on through this one. Okay, I'm going to do this quick because I know we need to get to these breakouts fairly soon. We've talked about, okay, I talked about just kind of the safety things. And now I want to just touch on before we go into these breakouts to help kind of give you a little bit more food for thought, juiciness to your conversations. If you decided, hey, I want to do a mutual aid project, I want to work in community with some folks to make something happen, here's some things that we think might be helpful to keep in mind. Um, I want to start from the left, just from the right. I'm going to start from the left. One is you don't have to do this by yourself. I've said this already before. There are no heroes in this work. So you don't have to source everything on your own. Go to grocery stores, go to your local health stores, go to other herbalists. I like try to hit up the folks with the most resources first before I try to go to folks who have fewer resources to share. But also think about relationship. Think about who is someone that if you're going to request something from them, are you able to or willing to or interested in offering back to them in the future? So, right, so that we keep the way this medicine moves kind of in a circular kind of way, keeping that going. Recycling when we can, again, keeping things really clean, boil your jars, boil your bottles, that kind of thing, but recycling and reusing, we don't have to spend a bunch of money necessarily in being able to offer medicine to folks. Don't necessarily try to, how do I say this? We don't have to create a movement or a need for the medicine that we have. Like it's not a thing of making a bunch of medicine and then like, okay, now who can I give this all to? Link in with systems of support that already are there. Link in with the networks that are already there, organizations or movement spaces or community centers or clubs or wherever the folks are meeting up and try to work together so you're not reinventing the wheel. In terms of the sustainability of medicine making, someone named mint. I think more than one person talked about mint family plants in the chat a little while ago. Know what's abundant, what's local, what's invasive, right? So kudzu, which at least in the South, a lot of the South is growing over and on everything, and it also can be beautiful medicine, right? So how can we work with what is showing us that it really wants to be in abundance? To offer that abundance forward in the form of medicine. Think about how bartering and trading can figure into the work. And if you are going to purchase herbs as kind of raw material for your medicine making, think about how what you're buying affects the land. How does it affect the people, the labor that's involved, the labor sources that are involved in getting this medicine to you. So if you are going to buy herbs from a company, make sure they're engaged in fair trade practices, making sure, that they're not exploiting indigenous communities, or clear cutting forests or so on and so on and so on. Think about local farmers, local growers, and what might be in abundance already there, where you might be doing them a favor to come through and pull all that dandelion out, or that chicory, or the ragweed, or the mullein, or whatever the thing might be. So think about what your farmers and growers might have available and could use your help with. Keep in mind that cooking spices are medicine as well, so that, whoever mentioned that ginger, that turmeric, cayenne, black pepper, all of these things, cinnamon, right? Keeping that in mind because those can often be really sustainable and certainly accessible. Yeah, do your work together, work in community, invite 3 people over or 8 people over or 25 people over to do this bottling and this boiling and this pouring off of medicines together. You can create more medicine that way, more pathways of communication, of fellowship, of relationship, and many hands make light work. So that is what I would share. And I'm going to pass this back to Jazz.
Thanks, Aya. I don't know about y'all, but I feel ready. I feel fortified. I feel equipped. So what we're gonna do next is we're actually gonna have a time to commune with each other, and start thinking about maybe one mutual aid or herbal or both action step that you can take in your own uh, journey. So you can also include like a timeline for completion. So some examples are I'm gonna connect with the local mutual aid group in the next month. I'm gonna make a neighbor elderberry syrup this week. I'm gonna sign up for an herbalism class within this year. So just something that yeah, can support you on this next journey, and then we can start, rocking the boat, making a wave, sending ripples all over the place. And also maybe you'll find some like-minded individuals that can be an accountability partner or comrade. So we're gonna open up these breakout groups. We're gonna have, we might not have the full 20 minutes, but we'll try to give you ample time to connect. So join those when you see them pop up, and then we'll see you after for a little share out and a wrap up. Okay, most peeps are in the thing. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Oh, welcome back, everyone. Hello, hello.
So excited to hear back from everybody.
Mhm. Yay! It's nice also not having the slides so we can see more faces. What's up?
Totally familiar faces. I see familiar faces.
Hey, friends. Right. Well, as people come back in, we wanted to give some space if anything emerged that was like exciting or juicy or inspiring or any reflections that you had while in your breakout room before we go into our Q&A. We'd love to hear just kind of from y'all and hear what came out of your connection time. Does anybody want to share? If you're feeling shy, you can share in the chat too. But we'd love to hear your voice also. So, Kelly, let's go.
Hey, yeah, I'm really excited coming out of that space. So my actionable item within 2 weeks, I am going to identify some of the um, herbs that I want to use connected to some of the health conditions that myself and my peoples tend to have. I'm part of a lot of different mutual aid networks already, and so I was thinking specifically about making teas and not necessarily tinctures, but just like let's make the juice, let's get the kids healthy, let's, all of that. So within 2 weeks, I'm going to do that and then start thinking about, what I'm growing or what I'm getting from others. And yeah, so I'm really excited.
So clear and actionable. Come on.
I love that, Callie. Let me know if you need any help. All right. Anybody else want to share? We have a couple minutes.
Sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't muted.
Oh, I didn't hear anything. No worries.
But since I'm not muted, I might as well just speak. This is Valeria. So, uh, um, an actionable step for me is kind of similar. I want, I need to know what I need to know. So, I really, really, really want to get this medicinal garden growing. So, just gathering the things that I need. So, if you have a resource where I can know all of the some good starter stuff to plant so that I want to take care of my family. I mentioned to my breakout partner that I have two grandbabies on the way. So I want to kind of start them off right and make sure all my grandchildren and my children are good and healthy. Um, Try to combat some of the illnesses that we've come across in the right way, the way my ancestors did. So that's my step, trying to figure out what I need to know. And I want to take a class. So if you have any resources, any additional resources, please pass them on.
I have a question. Where are you located, Valeria?
I am in Albany, New York,
Okay.
not too
I was
far from
asking
so.
because, okay, you're in Albany. The reason I'm asking is because depending on where you are, different things are going to grow, right? So I was asking you
Right.
to name where you are so that folks who are also in a similar area, similar climate, get it, Valeria. Share what you know.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Maybe one last one before we go into Q&A time.
I'd love to share. Um, I have a question. Is Valeria, can you repeat what you said, like a little summary in the chat of what you just shared? As Mama Io was saying to get with you if we're in a similar space, and I'm just a little bit below you in Maryland. Um,
Okay. What would you like for me to just what I said or my information?
yes,
What would you
ma'am.
like? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
please. What
Will
you
do.
said. If your information, if you're open to it too. My ADD kicked in, and then sorry.
No problem. I'll do that now. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to share. Um, Dee, if you would you mind if I share what we talked about? Okay. And this always excites me, but Dee was just talking about a next actionable step being talking to their family members and like having conversation and writing it down, like with regards to their knowledge about herbalism. But what I found interesting was Dee was saying like um instead of like just having conversation around these things and not necessarily naming, do you know something about herbalism? And that they might not identify with that, but might have like they might still have the wisdom if you just sit and talk. Um, but I That's what I wanted to share. It always excites me when people talk about speaking with their elders or speaking with folks and their lineages and writing it down. Yeah, and it's just getting the knowledge and the wisdom. So that's it. That's it.
Beautiful. I totally resonate with that in terms of like maybe there not being an identification of like I'm an herbalist, but my grandma when I was growing up, she gave me chamomile tea at night. She was like, "Here you go." So, it's like that knowledge lives and doesn't have to be so formalized. It's just like an embodiment and a way of being, which I think is really special and beautiful. So, I'm excited to hear what comes of that. So we have a Q&A portion. If anybody has any questions, comments, reflections, this is the time we can have a nice little conversation. Feel free to put them in the chat, or we welcome your voice to be in the space too, and we'll try to answer as best we can.
His hand is up.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for offering this workshop. My question is, well, I run a doula nonprofit for women of color, and we have what's called a Welcome Womb boutique, where we offer diapers and wipes and clothes and all things maternity and baby related. And so we are wanting to supplement that with food. We were gifted a refrigerator, so I've been putting in herbs from the garden, and we are planning to make soups, postpartum soups, or prenatal soups for moms to give away. My question is, how concerned do I need to be about the legality of doing offering food? And I don't even know if the right word is legal, legal, but like what should I be doing some research to make sure it's okay for us to prepare food in a non-kitchen, so to speak, or like not a commercial kitchen, and also offer herbs or food that people ingest that may or may not make them sick. It's like I don't know how concerned to be about that part of it.
And this space would be on the site of your nonprofit, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any? I'm not really great with legal stuff. That's not something.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, okay, so I'm not a lawyer and I'm not like a food inspection type person, like but one thing that I'm thinking about, and this is like a state by state kind of situation. One thing is if you were not selling, because you're giving away, right? You're providing for free. That's a big difference legally than selling. So like if you were to prepare soups or whatever and then sell it to people, then you either would have to be in a commercial kitchen or depending on your state, you can do like the cottage industry law and someone from the state would come and look at your kitchen, even if it's a home space and just make sure that it's copacetic, everything's good. Um, but I would bet, and I would check with your state that if you were doing giving away food, you do not necessarily have to have provided it or prepared it in a commercial kitchen or necessarily have to do the inspection for cottage industry because you're not selling. But in general, one thing I would just in terms of like the language that you use in terms of like the healing aspects of the foods and the medicines that are included in the foods, that is something that, okay, here's the part where it's like my school hat comes on and it's like you just have to be real specific in your choice of words. So you wouldn't necessarily say something like, this will heal this, because as herbalists, we're not diagnosing, we're not treating, we're not, prescribing, but you can use language in describing what it is you're sharing with folks around how do I say, like how it supports health, right? So you can't say this prevents preeclampsia, even if you know as a birth worker that it does, you can't say that legally. I would not do that, but you can say this is what it supports. Yes, warming soups. I love that language precisely. So you're talking about how it's supporting the body, how it's encouraging the body to heal without doing kind of going in a real medical kind of direction. But I would also check your whatever state you're in, I would go look up cottage industry and figure out which governmental body is in charge of that. And you could double check that way. But I think because
Okay.
you're giving away, you should be all right.
Okay. Thank you.
I see another question. Valeria's asked if there are, I just lost it. If there are any books, I believe it said if there were books that are good for getting started. Working the Roots is amazing. That's such a good start.
Let's
Are there
see.
any books? Do you have any favorite books, Jess?
I have so many favorite books. I think African American Herbalism
Yeah.
is a really great book that's like more culturally specific. If we're thinking about, are we thinking about herbalism or farming? Oh yeah, African American Herbalism. Um, I really like the book Energetic Herbalism by Kat Meir. I think it has a really great, and I can put that in the chat as well. I think it has a really great like foundational overview of like a lot of herbal concepts and it's really supportive. Um, Even me reading it now, I'm like, dang, this is like the best book ever. Um, what else
You know,
working?
one that I really like, and I'll drop it in the chat. This is not by a Black person. But Thomas Easley has a book called The Modern Herbal Dispensatory. The Modern Herbal Dispensatory. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. But that's a really good one because it contains a whole lot of information. It really focuses in on medicine making. It's super practical. It's really accessible in terms of the reading style, and there's just so much good basic getting started information. So I'll drop that in the chat.
Yeah, and others feel free to also drop things in the chat if you got some books that help you out. Um, okay, we have about 5 minutes left for the Q&A. Are there any other questions?
Well, you know, and I thought of one more book, Body into Balance. I can't
Mm,
think of the Maria Noel Groves. I'll drop that in there too. It's another good kind of getting started book.
I have one too to share. It's called Mothering the Mother by Shafia Monroe, and
Ooh,
it's
sure. Promise you peace.
African American postpartum traditions, recipes, and healing.
beautiful. Kelly, you raised
Perfect. I
your
just
hand?
have two new babies, grandbabies on the way. So this is great. Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah, I had a question. I haven't seen the recipe book, so I don't know. Is the recipe book more tinctures or teas? And you mentioned, the difference between like, using alcohol or I think glycerin. But just wondering in general, do you find more of a medicinal property in extracting for teas, or I mean extracting for tinctures or putting in teas, or um, I don't know if that's a fully formed question, but what's better? What do you think? What do you like? And what's the recipes?
Um,
Oh, you're getting
well,
into
I
the
just
nitty
wanted to,
gritty.
oh yeah, I just wanted to clarify you mean the resource like list that we're gonna send out with like the recipes later.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a variety of things on there. I think that we kind of there's I think one tincture on there. There's like a recipe for food. There's teas. There's eye wash.
There are
There's glycerin. There's
powders. There's so
that.
many different, yeah.
There's a lot of different. Um, and I
There's
mean,
syrup on there.
oh
There's a
yeah,
syrup in the list. Yeah.
you seemed excited, Io, about the tincture versus tea conversation. Did you wanna get into that? You said the nitty gritty, so I
Because
don't
that is such
know.
a good nitty gritty question. I don't want to go too deep into that because I'm so aware where we are for time. But I'm trying to think like what excites me about that question is the curiosity, because it's such a good question. And the answer is it's complicated. It's really a thing of what are you trying to what kind of medicine are you trying to elicit from that plant, right? So what constituents, what chemicals, like are we trying to really get the minerals from that plant to get into our bodies and support us, in which case alcohol is not as helpful necessarily as a vinegar extraction. There's some plants, depending on what you're what you're hoping, how you're hoping it's going to help. It might be better in alcohol. It might be better in water. Often, I mean, technically, no, I started to say we could say that alcohol, like I can say that alcohol as a tincture is stronger generally than glycerin in terms of its, you're going to get more of whatever chemicals you're trying to get from the plant into alcohol, even though alcohol is not necessarily going to be the best choice for everybody. So I could say that alcohol tinctures tend to be stronger than glycerids, but it really it depends so much on which medicine you're talking about and how you're hoping that it's going to support health. It just depends. That's what makes it so nitty gritty, and that's why this is the kind of thing I said at the beginning, like there's no bottom to this. You could study this forever and ever and ever. So it really depends. Do you have anything you would add to that, though, Jazz?
Yeah, I was gonna say like there's definitely merit to the strength that alcohol tinctures can bring to the table. But I would say, in terms of like accessibility and like being able to reach maybe like a larger number of people that I prefer to work with teas. Especially like in the context of mutual aid, because there's going to be just so many factors when making medicine for a large group of people in terms of what their bodies can handle, their sensitivity to alcohol, etc. And so, and I mean, and plants too, but I usually veer more towards teas. I also make glycerin tinctures that are going to be a little less strong, but they're also not going to have like that super strong alcohol component. Um, and yeah, so that's what I was thinking when you were talking, Io, but I agree. It's like so complex because all of our bodies are so different. Um, and and that's like the challenge of like more the community-based herbalism rather than like the very like one-to-one. But yeah, so I'd like veer on the side of like caution, like more accessible plants, things that you find more often. Like Io said, like things that you find at the grocery store. People are more in tune with their allergies there. So yeah, thanks for asking, Callie. Does that answer your question? Do you have like any additional things?
I will keep asking questions down the road, but right now that was a great
Keep
answer.
asking.
Thank you.
Um, all right. Well, we're kind of nearing almost to the end of our time, which makes me sad. I love hanging out. Um, and so uh please continue. Yeah, I'm gonna say like, we should all get together again. No. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna share some resources and also share some ways to stay connected to us. And then yeah, we'll close our time together. Sad. So Hillary, yeah, thank you, if you could. I'll go ahead, take it away.
So we have included in this slide deck, which you will all get, someone asked in the chat. We're going to be sharing out this recording as well as the slides, and all of the links within the slides are active links. So we wanted to mention a few resources in the slides that are really great spaces for inspiration. The mutual aid herbal directory, and these are spaces that are kind of more widespread. So depending on where you are geographically, there should be something that can support everyone in these resources. So we've mentioned Herbalista, and the images are also, you can click on them too. Herbalista Free Clinic is down in Atlanta. One thing I love about Herbalista is that everything that they do, they make, like everything in writing is made available. So they have all kinds of really great things like logs, inventory, procedures, safety procedures. If someone wanted to do very simple, quick intakes at community gatherings just to get elicit enough information to then choose which remedy is good for you. They have those things all in writing and they make it available for free. There are regional herbalist directories that Heart Space Healing, which is Jazz, has put together so that you can find other folks in your area who are doing the good work, maybe collaborate together, support one another in the work. More information about mutual aid history and how mutual aid has worked in different spaces. Mutual Aid 101 basic course. I love seeing in the chat the exchange of information. Keep this going now. So there are these resources here. We did mention, someone also asked about what is included in the resource document. So yes, again, it's not all tinctures. There's teas, there are tinctures, there are powders, there are salves, all kinds of things. So you're going to find a wide variety of resources in the recipes in that packet, which you're also going to get alongside the recording and the slides. So I think that's all I have to share about these resources.
Lovely. We can see the next slide. Here it is. So we'd love to stay connected. This was fun. It's a good vibe. So we put both of our Instagrams here. I also put my email in the chat. And also something very exciting to share is this year. Um, Niall and I have been developing a 10-month herbal cohort for Black folks that are aspiring community herbalists. And you'll receive the slides and the link to that. More the information and the application are included. And it's like going to be a really phenomenal opportunity to build an herbal foundation. And I'm so honored to be working with Io on that. It's called Legacy to Liberation. Io, do you want to share anything else about it? I'm just grinning. I can't stop.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I will want to share. I've been sure we've been working so hard for months to just bring solid, helpful information that you can support yourselves, your communities, your loved ones, the block. I did want to mention that we're accepting applications through the end of the month. So the 30th of July is the last day to apply. And so if you're thinking about it or you think you're interested, just go ahead and apply. We'd love to be in space with you, learn together. So I just wanted to make that last little pitch.
Yeah, thanks, Io. Um, so yeah, those are the ways that you can stay connected with us. Um, I also, works for Braiding Seeds and I work for Soulfire Farm. So we also have programming through there that's super um, beautiful and exciting and connected to lands and people. So stay in touch. And yeah, if we want to move into it, we can start our closing. I can't believe it.
We're at the end. It was so lovely. So yeah, for this last slide, there's an image of one of, definitely one of my favorites, favorite heroines, heroes, champions of the culture. And I had somewhere a quote that I have since lost, so I'm not going to worry about the quote. Um, but I believe on the last slide, do we have Fannie Lou Hamer?
Mhm.
Let's go to the last slide.
It's coming.
It is. It's funny, I had a paragraph that I cannot get my hands on, y'all, but I'm going to tell you where it came from, and I'll actually drop this in the chat as well. Yes, Fannie Lou Hamer and the Freedom Farm. So there is a book called Gather. It's by Dr. Shante Reese. And there was this really amazing paragraph that I cannot get my hand on right this second, about mutual aid and about how it is something that, yes, has been born out of colonialism and the needs that that's created, but also born out of the folks that tend to be the most marginalized. So folks who are marginalized because of class, because of gender, um, because of language, sexuality, immigration status, all of these things, age. And what we find, and I think Dean Spade has also spoken to this, is that it's on the margins that the most profound and exciting work around mutual aid is happening or has always happened. I think that Fannie Lou Hamer of Freedom Farm, look that up, one of our earliest champions of farming cooperatives, um, one of our champions of knowing that when you're able to feed yourselves and one another, you have power and have agency. That is the person that we wanted to send us out. That's the ancestor that we wanted to leave the space holding close. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody's free till everybody's free. So let's make sure that we go on out and get ourselves and everybody free. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, y'all.
Thanks for being here. Hope to see you again.
Thank
You
you
will, I
so
know it.
much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Elle. That was wonderful.
Thank
That's so
you.
generative.
Um,
I'm gonna one sec.
It is my hope that folks go out there and be like, let's do some medicine, let's do some mutual aid.
I
I really
know.
hope.
I sure did put everybody in the waiting room. Oops.
Did you? I sure did.